under the kind of rough reading of the code, building department does not, interprets that to say that, well, no, swing sets don't count as structures. And so it was, what do we do about that? What, you know, for the members of council that want to change that, to not allow that, well, what do we do? And so I put together a draft ordinance, some language, and council passed it as a resolution to send here for the planning commission to talk about it. I watched the meeting. I didn't watch it the day it happened, but I watched it a little while later, and there were a lot of questions. The language that I put together was kind of as broad as possible to just to cover anything that might come up, because that tends to be the way it works. If there's things that people don't like, well, if we're going to go to the trouble to not allow this, well, what's the next thing that they haven't come up with yet that's going to keep out? And there were a lot of questions from the Planning Commission. They're all reasonable questions. And it's kind of a question of what a part of it is what is it that we want to cover and what do we not want to cover, assuming we want to make some changes. The Housing, Health, and Recreation, I can never remember the full name without looking, Housing, Health, and Recreation Committee met to kind of go over some of those questions. And kind of what I think kind of the sense was is that swing sets, they don't want to see swing sets, and play structures. Some of the other questions, like a shed, would a shed be okay? A shed would be a regular structure, I think, under the code, and so it wouldn't be allowed in the front, and subject to setbacks and that kind of thing. And I'm trying to remember some of the others. I should have read through this. Trampolines probably shouldn't be allowed. We had a long discussion, this conversation about what about like the Fisher-Price plastic ones that, you know, they weigh 4 pounds, you can pick them up and carry them to the backyard. My thought was, well, we could ban them. I guess the building department would come by and say, you can't have it in the front yard. They could pick it up and move it to the back, and then the next weekend have it back out in front. The discussion was, you can imagine, quite wide-ranging and covered all kinds of things. But I think the idea is to at least have something in the code that says the larger, more permanent swing sets, you know, the big wooden structures, trampolines, should not be allowed in front yards. And we got to, it was moved to later in the discussion by the committee, but one of the issues is the corner lots, and that's a tough one to work on. Corner lots is the way they're treated. I think the way my understanding is that if it's a corner lot, then both of the frontages on the street are considered front yards, in the way that's done. And there was a part of that discussion. Well, in some places that would be okay. In some corners that's fine. In other corners it's not fine. And there are streets where we would consider this the street. This is the street that everybody cares about, but the side street would still be considered. But that we really don't care, or they don't really care so much about that. And one of the suggestions that came up, and I don't know how practical this is do we do, you know, can we set it up so that you've got, let me see what's kind of the best way to do this, is you've got a street. It's hard to do without a pictorial representation. So you've got, here you go, here's kind of the main street. There's the front door of the house. This obviously is the front yard, and the count, this is the front yard to the house, to the structure line, and this over here, the extension of the structure, would, this between that and the street would also be counted as front yard, and then from the edge of the structure back would be considered backyard or rear yard. But some way to deal with it. I don't think the committee has a good answer. They didn't really have a particular thing on how to deal with that, but the basic goal is we don't want, or they don't want, people to put up swing sets, big swing sets, play structures, trampolines, in what looks like the front yard of a house.
Can I just say one thing real quick? I want to note that Marilyn Hanrahan here is the chairman of that committee, just for the record, to make sure that they know that she is here. So,
and I would invite her, if I was you, I'd invite her up. She's the impetus behind
we will. And so, I guess my question is, once these changes are made, we solved one problem. In the history of this city, in recent years on changing things, when they change something, they may solve one problem, they create 3 more. That's what my concern is. I understand that, you know, the idea of a swing set being in the front yard. I guess my question would be, is this we have a massive overruns of swings in front yards. I've not heard of that. I've not heard, nobody's come up to me and said, Mary, you've got to do something about these swing sets. That's comment number one. Comment number two is, looking at these proposals, driveways, and some of these zoning codes and these code violations, they fit certain types of houses. Not all of our houses are cookie cutters. Not all the houses are large. Not all the houses are setbacks, large setbacks. Not all of the houses have large front yards and driveways and garages behind it. So one of my concerns is, if we say, okay, we're going to tailor this to do it, are we fitting certain houses, or are we causing more problems for people who don't have larger houses and no driveways and no backyards? Am I making sense? And that's the problem with these. Sometimes we move too quick. I've seen it on driveways. We talked for months about chickens. I mean, so I just think we should look at it and try to honor what that committee is, their goal is to try to get, but yet on the same time, be cognizant of these zoning things that we pass, because they have ramifications that a lot of times are not seen. Am I making sense? I mean, I just don't want to take something that's very difficult and make it simple, because I think it runs into other issues. You've got experience in it, you've got experience in it, and you've got experience in it, and Maryland's got experience in it. That's all I'm saying.
Right, and I would say I think that's exactly the point of bringing it. Here's kind of what I wanted to was present. Here's kind of the goal, you know, based on the discussions the committee have with people that live and represent Norwood, and the people on this body that have been involved in this and have dealt with, probably know a lot more about individual parcels of property in Norwood than I do. And what's the best way to approach this with avoiding as many kind of unforeseen circumstances? And I was holding off on the parking issue. That's a whole separate.
Right. I know. What I read is like
confuses
I
me.
could see.
So, right.
If I can, my two comments or two questions underneath play structures, second paragraph. It says tire swings and porch swings should not be banned from front yards. But I can attest to certain area of town where there's a lot of rental properties, where in the past I've taken an old truck tire, tied it up in a tree with the rope, and partied in the front yard all afternoon until the neighbors had enough, called the police, and kind of broke it up. That's my only concern of saying tire swings, because I understand they sell children's tire swings that are like this, plastic and nice, but I also have seen truck tire and car tires hanging in trees. To me, I'm just saying with that, that's more offensive than having playground equipment, because you could have a 60-foot rope and you could be swinging all the way around this, over the street and everywhere else. That's one concern. If we're going to, I would not exempt, my opinion, tire swings from the front yard. And then secondly, I know when we talk about the corner lots and that, and I understand the diagram from behind the house, so on and so forth. And we had that conversation last meeting, when it comes to, and I'll use the example of Sharpsburg Grade School, that fronts, in reality, all four are 3 streets. So it really has 3 front yards. Would they be allowed to replace, or any of the schools, playgrounds equipment in there without saying, you know, what's got to be on this side to this side and over to that side? And as I say, I would say, I understand Norwood View. You could go to the back of the school, the one part on Hannaford and the other side on Drex. That equipment is behind the schools. I understand that would make sense. But I'm just saying, there's always, as the mayor said, special cases where I say Sharpsburg comes to a point, right at Kenilworth in Smith Road. Could they at all be able to replace the piece of playground equipment they got there? I don't know. But the elementary school's different, Williams Avenue grade school's different, but I'm just bringing up the one that would be of concern. I'd hate to, rule that one out. And I know our unique circumstances, or is there an appeal right? I guess my question is, if we say no, can the person and/or organization come to BZA and request an appeal for a hearing?
Sure, I don't know why not.
It's not a use variance, so any of this swing sets would all be appealable. My concern too, though, is just from a logistics standpoint, I don't want the building department, building and zoning department to get to the point where we're issuing zoning permits for swing sets. I don't think you want to go down that route. We have, everything's important in life, but we really have, in the scope of everything, this is probably the lowest priority, and we have bigger fish to fry to deal with than monitoring a placement of a swing set on a piece of property.
Yeah, first question is, I think the issue is not so much the swing set themselves, but it's our definition of the term front yard.
Right.
I think that the crux of the matter is the consensus is we really don't want to see fences or swing sets built in the front yard as defined by the front of the house. You have a front of a house, you have a back of a house. And regardless of a corner lot or a through lot, there is always a front of a house and a back of a house. Even in some of the newer construction, they're going to be defined front and defined back. And I think what the focus should be is defining what we term as a front yard for the purposes of fences, playground equipment, swing sets, driveways, etc. And I think that will help address some of the concerns that's raised in the swing set on Forest Avenue. Unfortunately, the one on Forest Avenue, I believe that the front yard is Jefferson Street, that their actual address is Jefferson.
No, it's Forest.
Is it Forest? Okay. But defining what we mean by front yard, and I think the example of a simple diagram with a shading saying this portion is a front yard, this portion is a backyard, regardless of the street. Let's take the street out of it and focus on the house and how the swing set or the fence relates to the house, not so much how it's going to relate to the street, because what we don't want is these beautiful homes having these big swing sets right in front of them, so that it takes away from the neighborhood character.
Okay.
Can
But now, are we going away from a side yard? We're just having a front yard and a backyard?
Well, it would be basically an illustration map showing this area, as indicated in the map, is where you can have a swing set. And it would be in relation to the street. Now, if we want to set the swing sets back from the side and rear yard, we can, but I think the main issue is the complete ban of swing sets.
I mean, just for an example, there's a property at, I believe it's Beach and Marsh, Burwinkle's old house. That is a huge lot.
Yep.
They have a huge side yard. They have a huge yard all over it. The house is basically set right in the middle. And so, I mean, that's just one example. There's others I know.
Oh, yes.
But they have a huge side yard, and it's on a corner lot also. So basically, that side yard, to an extent, would be unusable for play.
If we were to define the front yard
Right.
based on the street. What I'm suggesting is we define the yard for this purposes of the fences, swing sets, parking as it relates to the house itself. So, for example, the Burwinkle's house, yes, they have this huge side yard, but in our example, the area that would be prohibited from putting a swing set would be very narrowly defined based upon that front of the house. So we couldn't put a swing set right in front of the house. You probably couldn't put it right on the corner, but that big side yard, for the purposes of a swing set, we would not prohibit.
Can I take just a second here and go out of the normal proceedings? I think it's only common courtesy and fair. I mean, Mrs. Hanrahan has been involved in this, and she's the head of the committee, and the discussions and the points we have made so far. Ms. Hanrahan, would you care to comment on any part of what we've said so far? If you would, I mean, and so, rather than us have a say here and talk for 25 minutes and then have you walk away and not have your questions. So if you would like to elaborate more, then we would be,
Yeah, I would like to say.
would you come up, please? And then we'll have you back up again if you want to comment on another subject, which I'm sure you will, which is good.
Okay, when it came to the swing sets, I got complaints. When I first got the first complaint I got was a neighbor right in the neighborhood. They were concerned about it. They were concerned, what if every yard did this? Which is an issue. The first time someone goes up, they're concerned more are going to go up. And if something isn't done and the second one goes up without any new zoning, guess what? They're grandfathered in. And then number two's right there in the same block. They're worried about property values. It is a mud pit underneath it right now. I mean, I go past there, and of course, it's a play set. You know, what else are you going to get but mud? It is not attractive. People, and I will say this, and I know people might get upset with me, but when you buy a corner lot, you know you're buying a corner lot. It's not like you wake up one day and somebody says, oh, you're on a corner. There are restrictions in all kinds of things when you buy them. This is a Floral Avenue, or Forest Avenue address. I believe, if I'm not, and I don't know, I'm just guessing that the door was switched around. And it does face on Forest Avenue, and people over there, and not just there, I had one neighbor complain, but I did have other complaints. I didn't make this up in my brain. And once one goes up, they're concerned more are going to go up. And, you know, once I get a call, I think I have a responsibility to look into it and, you know, and take it further if I think that the zoning isn't there to help them.
And I appreciate it. I'm sure there'll be another subject that we'll be discussing that you may
Say same
comment.
thing?
Yeah, so we'll move on but I appreciate you having your input into it. Next.
Well, I mean,
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot one more thing. You asked me, I'm sorry. Right now, Hamilton County zoning resolution does not allow swing sets, jungle gyms, and other play devices in the front yard for Hamilton County. So why it would be different to enforce it for Norwood than Hamilton County would be a question that I would have of Mr. Stoker, since you brought that up. You didn't want to enforce swing sets in the front yard.
Oh, I can answer that question for you.
Okay.
Hamilton County typically deals with rural communities and unincorporated areas. That's a broad sweep. I would not necessarily recommend that for the city of Norwood. Again, I have not received any complaints except from you and Mrs. Durkers on this particular playground equipment. So to me, and I'm not the powers to be that passes legislation, but I've discussed that with several people. To me, unless you have a groundswell of people coming in addressing this issue, I've only had 2 people that have complained, and that is you and Mrs. Durkers about the swing set. So again, I don't want to get into the business of regulating on a zoning permit swing sets and the placements of swing sets, especially in people's backyards. To me, I think that's too intrusive. Government's always looked at as intrusive to begin with. And if you start regulating where they can even place a playground equipment in the rear yard, that's going to get, you think you're getting calls now about this, you will really start getting calls of where they can place somebody's playground equipment. That's my opinion. That's my professional opinion over the years.
I would ask Keith, On your result that you had on page 2 would be to add an item C, which would say, the simplest way, I'm assuming, swing sets, jungle, gyms, trampolines, and other play devices shall be located in the rear yard.
It's a suggestion. I would want, from my perspective, it's a question of what is the goal that we want to accomplish, planning commission and council want to accomplish, and then let's work out the language that'll do that, and that is partly a conversation with Jerry, who would be enforcing it, but this is a suggestion. There were a bunch of questions about the specific language in the resolution at the last meeting, so, and that was, this is pretty much taken from the Hamilton County. That's a very simple way to do it, so, well, let's toss that out to the planning commission, see what they think about that alternative.
I would say we would end up with the same issue because our definition of a front yard would basically prohibit the swing sets on Sharpsburg, Williams, corner lots, people that have through lots. And I don't think that's the intent of council. I think the intent is we don't want it in front of the house. And I think the simplest way is to say something or have language that basically says, we do not want swing sets in front of the house. And the easiest way to do that is graphically with an illustration, because
Showing the address.
showing the address, it's a simple square, and there are other communities. I know Kansas City, Kansas, and their narrow lot design guidelines that's available online has diagrams which basically are a square representing the structure. They identify the front of the house, and they just shade the areas of, in this area, you can have swing sets.